Rookies pointed a gun at the black woman's head and learned why you should never threaten a Navy SEAL. Are you afraid to look at me now? The cadet's voice echoed arrogantly and cruel across the training yard as he held the training pistol against her temple. Around her, a dozen young men in uniform burst out laughing, taunting her further, their voices echoing off the walls of the military center. But she didn't blink, didn't move an inch. Her jaw was locked, her eyes fixed ahead. Not a flicker of fear on her face, just a suffocating absolute silence. And that made them laugh even louder. "Come on, she's frozen," shouted one of them. "I thought SEALs were tougher than that," added another, provoking a new wave of cruel laughter. The cadet with a gun leaned closer, whispering contemptuously, "Look at her, all that training, and she can't even take a little joke." Commander Tiffany Ross was 34 years old and never imagined that an undercover observation mission would become such a brutal life lesson. The first black woman Navy SEAL to lead special operations in 3 different war zones. Her file was classified at such a high level that half of the instructors at the base didn't even know who she really was. She had been sent to that academy on a temporary mission just to observe, to blend in. No insignia on her shoulder, no titles on her chest, just a silent presence meant to test leadership potential and expose weaknesses where they are best hidden in arrogance. She remained silent all morning, watching the cadets stumble through basic tactical exercises. Their posture was sloppy, their focus scattered, but their attitude that was razor-sharp, presumptuous, privileged, dangerous. And now one of them had the audacity to press a weapon, training or not, to the temple of a combat-decorated SEAL, just to see if she would flinch. "Do you still think this is a game?" she asked, her voice cutting like steel. The courtyard fell into a deadly silence. The other cadets stood frozen watching. One dropped his water bottle. Another backed away without realizing it. They had been trained to respect rank, to memorize procedures. But this was real. This was war experience transformed into movement. Every inch of her posture screamed combat experience. The way she breathed, the way her muscles twitched imperceptibly, the way her eyes calculated distances and angles without blinking. "That was a rubber gun," she said, still motionless. "If it had been real, you'd be scraping your little friend's brains out of your boots." What none of those privileged boys knew was that they were seconds away from discovering why you should never ever underestimate someone just because of their appearance. While they laughed at her supposed vulnerability, her eyes revealed a serenity that only exists in those who have weathered much worse storms and lived to tell the tale. If this story of courage and justice is touching your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple moment of humiliation would become the catalyst for a lesson none of them would ever forget. What happened in the next few seconds completely changed the dynamic of that military courtyard. The cadet holding the training weapon, Tyler Brennan, son of a retired general and accustomed to having all doors open to him because of his last name, began to laugh even louder when he realized she hadn't reacted the way he expected. "Guys, look at this," he shouted to the others, gesturing theatrically. "This lady here must think she can teach us a lesson in morality. How cute." The other cadets approached in a circle like hyenas surrounding wounded prey. For them, this was just another morning of fun at the expense of someone who clearly didn't belong in that environment. "Seriously, where did you come from?" Another teased, crossing his arms. "Because you obviously don't understand how things work around here." Commander Tiffany Ross had faced much worse situations than a bunch of spoiled boys playing soldier. At 18, she was the only black woman in her class at the Naval Academy, enduring cruel jokes and constant sabotage from classmates who believed she was stealing a spot that should have gone to a white man. At 22, she led her first mission in hostile territory, saving 7 soldiers from an ambush where the enemies had 3 times as many weapons. At 28, she survived a chemical attack that killed half her battalion, carrying 3 wounded comrades 12 km to safety. And at 30, she received the Medal of Honor for a classified operation that saved hundreds of civilians from imminent massacre. But there in that courtyard, facing the disrespect of young people who had never had to prove anything beyond the name on their ID card, she felt a familiar anger rising in her throat. "Do you have family in the military?" Tyler asked, feigning interest. "Because usually people like you only get in here because of quotas, right? Diversity and stuff." The laughter echoed again, but this time with a sharper, more directed cruelty. "I bet you've never held a real gun in your life," added another cadet, gesturing exaggeratedly. "You must have come from one of those social programs." It was exactly this kind of privileged arrogance that Tiffany had been sent to identify and correct. Her official mission was to assess leadership potential among elite cadets, but in reality, she was there to figure out which of these grown children would pose a real danger when placed in command positions over actual soldiers. And now she had her answer. Tyler leaned closer, whispering loudly enough for everyone to hear. Look, no one here wants to humiliate you unnecessarily. How about you accept that this place isn't for you and request a transfer? It would be better for everyone. Especially for you, added another, provoking a new wave of laughter. What none of those boys knew was that every word of contempt, every cruel laugh, every gesture of superiority was being carefully filed away in the strategic mind of one of the most lethal and respected women in the U.S. Special Forces. Tiffany took a deep breath, her eyes moving slowly over the group, memorizing every face, every arrogant posture, every condescending smile. Interesting, she murmured almost to herself. What was interesting? Tyler moved closer, misinterpreting her calmness as submission. Do you finally understand where you are? I understand perfectly, she replied, her voice maintaining that unsettling serenity. I understand that you truly believe you deserve to be here. Of course we deserve it. Another cadet exploded. Our families built this institution. Our parents and grandparents served with honor. While people like you, people like me what? She interrupted, finally turning to face them directly. The silence was instant and uncomfortable. Tyler swallowed hard, realizing that something in her demeanor had fundamentally changed. Finish the sentence, she said, taking a step forward. People like me, what exactly? None of them could answer. Suddenly the dynamic had completely reversed, and they felt like children being confronted by an adult who had discovered their mischief. It was at that moment that Tiffany decided these boys would learn a lesson they would remember for the rest of their privileged military careers. Each new humiliation they tried to impose only fueled something inside her that these arrogant young men couldn't see. A silent strength being strengthened by the very injustice they tried to normalize. What those privileged children didn't know was that every act of contempt was writing their own sentence of defeat, and that the real storm was yet to come. In that moment of tense silence, something imperceptible changed in Tiffany's posture. It wasn't anger. It was something much more dangerous. It was pure calculation. Finish the sentence, she repeated, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. People like me, what exactly? Tyler swallowed hard, but his arrogance spoke louder than his instinct for self-preservation. People who get spots because of, diversity policies, not because of actual merit. The other cadets laughed nervously, but now there was something different in the air. A tension that hadn't been there before. Actual merit, she repeated slowly, as if testing the taste of the words. Interesting concept. It was at that moment that Colonel James Mitchell, a veteran of 3 wars and chief instructor at the academy, appeared at the entrance to the courtyard. He had arrived for a routine inspection, but stopped abruptly when he saw the scene. His trained eyes immediately picked up on the dynamics. A group of cadets surrounding someone, aggressive postures, cruel laughter, and then he saw the face of the person in the center of the circle. Shit, he muttered under his breath, instantly recognizing one of the most respected operators in the U.S. Special Forces. He knew Tiffany Ross by reputation. He had read classified reports on her missions, knew exactly who she was and why she was there, but he decided not to intervene immediately. He wanted to see how these privileged kids would behave when they thought no authority was watching. Look, Tyler continued, encouraged by Tiffany's silence. I'm not saying you're not valuable, just that this place requires a certain standard. Family tradition, the right background, that kind of thing. Proper background, she echoed, her eyes moving slowly around the group. Like yours, for example. Exactly, Tyler straightened up proud. My grandfather served in the Pacific. My father in Vietnam. This is an elite institution, you understand. It's not for just anyone. What Tyler didn't know was that every arrogant word was being recorded. Tiffany had discreetly activated the recorder on her military watch, standard equipment she always carried. Every insult, every prejudiced comment, every display of arrogance was being meticulously documented. What about you? Asked another cadet, crossing his arms. What's your military background? Where did your father serve? The question brought a pause. Tiffany lowered her eyes for a moment and Tyler misinterpreted it as embarrassment. Oh, I see, he said, smiling cruelly. First-generation military. How cute. I bet your parents were proud when you made it in here. What neither of them knew was that Tiffany's father, Master Sergeant Robert Ross, had died in service when she was 16, not in glorious combat, but in a training accident caused by faulty equipment that the military corporation knew was damaged, but chose not to replace to save money. She grew up promising herself that she would honor his memory in a way that no privileged general's child could ever understand. "My father," she said quietly, "taught me that a soldier's true worth isn't in the surname they carry, but in the blood they're willing to spill for the person next to them." How poetic, Tyler laughed. But in real life, connections matter, networking, family. You'll never understand that. It was at that moment that Tiffany made a decision that would completely change the trajectory of those arrogant young men. "You're right about one thing," she said, surprising everyone. "I really don't belong here." The cadets exchanged triumphant glances. They had finally broken her resistance. "I don't belong here," she continued, "because my place is in operations you don't even know exist. In missions so classified that not even the children of generals are allowed to know they happened." Tyler frowned, confused by the change in her tone. "But you know what?" she added, stepping forward. "You gave me exactly what I needed." "What did you need?" another cadet asked nervously. "Evidence." The word hung in the air like a threat. Suddenly, the dynamic had completely changed. The cadets looked at each other, realizing that something was terribly wrong. At the back of the courtyard, Colonel Mitchell smiled discreetly. He had seen that same expression on Tiffany's face in the mission reports. The absolute calm before the storm. Evidence of what? Tyler tried to maintain his arrogance, but there was a note of nervousness in his voice now. That some cadets at this prestigious academy believe that diversity is just a policy, that merit is measured by one's last name, and that a soldier can be publicly humiliated without consequences. She took off her watch and showed it to them. The small red light indicated active recording. Every word, every insult, every display of prejudice, all recorded in high definition. Tyler's face instantly palled. The other cadets took steps back, finally realizing they had made a terrible mistake. You can't record without our permission." One of them stammered. "In a federal military facility during an official investigation." She smiled coldly. "Actually, not only can I, it's my duty." "Official investigation." Tyler swallowed hard. "What investigation?" "The investigation that determines which cadets have the potential to lead soldiers in actual combat, and which pose a danger to the cohesion and effectiveness of the troops." It was at that moment that Tyler Brennan realized he had completely underestimated the situation. They hadn't just insulted some random person. They had provided recorded evidence of institutional bias to someone who clearly had the authority to use that information. "Look, maybe we expressed ourselves poorly." He tried backtracking, but it was too late. "No," she interrupted. "You expressed exactly what you think, and now I have the proof I need." The arrogant confidence that had dominated the group had completely evaporated. In its place was only the growing panic of privileged young people, realizing that their cruel words would have real consequences. "What are you going to do with this recording?" asked another cadet, his voice trembling. Tiffany looked at each of them slowly, memorizing every frightened face. "I'm going to do exactly what any soldier would do with evidence of misconduct among cadets who consider themselves future military leaders." She paused deliberately, letting the weight of her words sink in. "I'm going to follow protocol." For a moment, as she walked calmly toward the courtyard exit, they all thought they were witnessing just another routine disciplinary situation, another report that would be filed away and forgotten. But anyone familiar with the true power of military justice knows that it moves with the precision of a war operation. Silent, methodical, and utterly devastating when it finally hits its target. What those arrogant young men didn't know was that they had just provided ammunition for a battle they didn't even realize they were fighting, and that the real storm was yet to come. The next 2 hours completely transformed the lives of those arrogant cadets in a way they would never forget. Tiffany walked calmly down the hallway to Colonel Mitchell's office, where he was waiting for her with an expression that mixed admiration and sinister curiosity. "Colonel," she said, placing the watch on his desk, "as requested in my observation mission, here is the evidence of inappropriate conduct among cadets vying for leadership positions." Mitchell pressed play and listened to every recorded word, every racial slur disguised as tradition, every comment about diversity quotas, every cruel laugh echoing through the small speaker. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, shaking his head. "In 30 years of military service, I've never seen anything so explicit." "There's more," Tiffany said, connecting her tablet. "I gained access to their social media accounts during their lunch break. the screen filled with screenshots of posts Tyler and his friends had made over the past few weeks. Racist memes shared with laughter, despicable comments about lowering military standards to accommodate minorities, photos of parties where they imitated offensive stereotypes. "My God," Mitchell whispered, scrolling through the images. They documented their own prejudice in detail. What Tyler Brennan didn't know was that his social media had been monitored for weeks. As part of Tiffany's investigation into leadership potential, she had created fake profiles to observe the cadets' online behavior when they thought no authority was watching. The result was a full dossier of misconduct that went far beyond what happened on the parade ground. Colonel Tiffany said, her voice maintaining that lethal professional calm, "I recommend immediate disciplinary action. These cadets pose a real risk to the cohesion and effectiveness of any unit under your command." Mitchell nodded gravely. "Granted. What kind of action do you recommend?" "Full dishonor, expulsion from the academy, permanent records in their military histories," and she paused deliberately, "disclosure of the investigation to the entire academy as an educational example." Meanwhile, on the parade ground, Tyler and his friends were desperately trying to downplay what had happened. "Dude, relax," one of them said nervously. "She's not going to do anything. She's just another person trying to cause trouble." "You heard her," Tyler replied, running his hands through his hair. "She said, protocol and official investigation. This is no joke. Maybe we should get our parents," suggested another. "My dad knows half the officers on this base." Tyler grabbed his phone to call his father, but the call went straight to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. What he didn't know was that General Brennan had received an official call exactly 15 minutes earlier. "General Brennan, this is Colonel Mitchell from the Naval Academy. I need to inform you of a disciplinary situation involving your son Tyler." The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes, but it was enough for General Brennan to understand that the military career he had planned for his son was ending before it even began. "Are you sure about this, Colonel?" asked the general, his voice heavy. "The evidence is irrefutable, sir. Audio recordings, social media posts, multiple witnesses. Your son demonstrated explicit racial bias against a senior officer on a classified mission." There was a long silence on the line. "I understand," the general finally said. "Proceed according to protocol, Colonel. There will be no interference on my part." At 30:30 p.m., a loudspeaker echoed throughout the academy. All cadets are to assemble immediately in the main auditorium for a mandatory disciplinary assembly. Tyler felt his stomach churn. His phone still had no response from his father, and now a disciplinary assembly had been called on the same day as his confrontation with that mysterious woman. In the auditorium, 400 cadets gathered in tense silence. Colonel Mitchell took the stage, followed by a figure who made Tyler feel as if his world was collapsing. Commander Tiffany Ross now wore her full military uniform. Medals of honor gleamed on her chest. Elite naval insignia decorated her shoulders. 3 gold stars indicated high-level classified operations. And in the center, the Congressional Medal of Honor, the highest American military decoration. "Cadets," Mitchell began, his voice echoing through the silent auditorium. "I present to you Commander Tiffany Ross, the first black female Navy SEAL to lead special operations in multiple war zones." A shocked murmur rippled through the auditorium. Tyler was pale as a ghost. "Commander Ross has been among you for the past few weeks on an observation mission to assess leadership potential and identify conduct issues." Mitchell paused deliberately, his eyes meeting Tyler's directly. "Unfortunately, some cadets have failed spectacularly in this assessment." Tiffany stepped forward, her presence commanding absolute respect from the entire audience. This morning, her voice cut through the silence like a knife. "A group of cadets decided it would be appropriate to point a training weapon at my head, insult my presence at this academy, and question whether I deserve to be here." The auditorium was so quiet you could hear people breathing. These same cadets expressed the belief that people like me only get military positions through diversity quotas and not through actual merit. Tyler wanted to disappear. He wanted to hide under the ground and never be found again. Cadet Tyler Brennan, Cadet James Parker, Cadet Michael Stevens, and Cadet David Chun, report to me immediately. The 4 young men stood up unsteadily, walking down the center aisle while 396 pairs of eyes watched them with a mixture of shock and judgment. "During my investigation," Tiffany continued, "I discovered that today's behavior was not an isolated incident, but part of a systematic pattern of prejudice and arrogance documented on your own social media." A giant screen descended behind her, displaying screenshots of the most offensive posts the 4 had shared. gasp echoed through the auditorium. Some cadets turned their faces away, ashamed to be associated with that level of ignorance. As a result of this investigation, Mitchell announced, taking back the microphone, "These 4 cadets are being immediately expelled from the Naval Academy. Their permanent records will reflect conduct incompatible with military values." Tyler slumped into the nearest chair. His military career was over. His reputation was destroyed. And all of this in front of the entire academy. In addition, Mitchell continued, "This investigation will be shared with other military institutions as educational material on the importance of respect and professionalism." But the humiliation was not over yet. "Cadet Brennan," Tiffany said, addressing Tyler directly, "you stated today that I would not understand networking and family connections in the military environment." Tyler swallowed hard, unable to respond. "I would like you to know that your father, General Brennan, was personally informed of your conduct." His response was, and I quote, "Proceed according to protocol, Colonel. There will be no interference on my part." Tyler's last shred of hope was completely shattered. Not even his father wanted or was able to save him. "The real tragedy," said Tiffany, her voice now laden with deep sadness, "is that you have wasted an opportunity to serve alongside soldiers who gave their lives to protect the very values you have ridiculed today." As the 4 former cadets were escorted out of the auditorium in utter disgrace, a fundamental transformation began to take shape within that institution. For a moment, as the doors closed behind them, the silence in the auditorium was deafening. But those who know the power of true justice know that it moves like a storm. Silent at first, but utterly devastating when it finally reveals its full force. 6 months after that day that forever changed the Naval Academy, an extraordinary transformation had taken hold of the institution. Commander Tiffany Ross now served as Director of Inclusion and Operational Excellence, a position created specifically after her groundbreaking investigation. Under her leadership, the Academy implemented rigorous behavioral assessment protocols that became a model for military installations across the country. The case of the Brennan Four, as they became known in the military media, became required study in leadership courses. Tyler, James, Michael, and David not only lost their military careers, they were permanently banned from any position in federal government agencies. Tyler Brennan desperately tried to use his father's connections to get a job in the private sector, but the viral recording of his prejudiced comments had spread across all professional networks. Companies simply did not want to associate their brand with that kind of toxic mindset. But the real transformation took place in the hearts and minds of the cadets who witnessed that historic lesson. Commander Ross, Cadet Wilson said, approaching her after a lecture on inclusive leadership, "I wanted to thank you for opening our eyes. I was becoming like them and didn't even realize it." Tiffany smiled, watching the young man who months ago had been just another silent follower of toxic behavior. "Courage isn't about never making mistakes, Wilson. It's in recognizing when we do and choosing to be better." The Academy now welcomed candidates from all socioeconomic backgrounds through scholarship programs that Tiffany had implemented. Overall performance had improved dramatically. It turned out that real diversity of experiences and backgrounds produced more resilient, creative, and effective soldiers. General Brennan, meanwhile, made a decision that surprised everyone. He personally sought out Tiffany for a private conversation. "Commander," he said, his voice laden with genuine regret, "I failed as a father in raising Tyler with those distorted values. I would like to support your cultural transformation programs." The significant donation he made to the Academy's inclusion programs became the first of many. Other veteran officers, ashamed of the behavior of their own privileged children, began to question how they had unconsciously perpetuated a culture of exclusion. Tyler Brennan, on the other hand, learned his lessons the hard way. Working odd jobs to survive, he finally began to understand what it meant to have no automatic privileges. 6 months later, he wrote a public letter of apology that was widely shared, but it came too late to reverse the consequences of his actions. "Commander Ross," he wrote, "I cannot undo my ignorance, but I can testify that you were right about real merit. For the first time in my life, I am learning what it means to earn something through my own efforts." Tiffany's response was public and powerful. Genuine regret is the first step toward real growth. But consequences remain as reminders that our choices matter. The most profound lesson came when Tiffany received an unexpected call. "Commander Ross, this is Senator Patricia Hamilton. I've seen your work at the Academy and would like to propose something revolutionary." The proposal was to expand Tiffany's protocols to all U.S. militaries. Her methodology for identifying systemic biases and building inclusive leadership would be implemented nationally. Senator Tiffany replied, "It would be an honor to serve in a way that my father would be proud of." On the first anniversary of that historic confrontation, the Academy held a special ceremony. Cadets from all backgrounds, united by real values of excellence and mutual respect, paid tribute to the soldiers who gave their lives for a country that promises equal opportunities for all. Tiffany, watching those diverse young people singing the national anthem with genuine unity, felt a deep satisfaction. It wasn't revenge she felt, it was fulfillment. True justice was not in destroying those who discriminated against her, but in building a system where future generations would never face the same ignorance. "The best revenge," she said in her final speech, "is not to lower those who lowered us. It is to raise the bar so high that mediocre behavior simply can no longer compete." Tyler Brennan, watching that ceremony on television from his small apartment, finally understood the magnitude of what he had lost, not just a career. He had lost the chance to be part of something bigger than himself. To serve alongside extraordinary people who measured value by character, not by last name. The Naval Academy now had the highest performance and satisfaction rates in its history. Cadets competed to study there, not for elitist prestige, but for real excellence and the opportunity to serve in an environment that truly honored the best military values. Tiffany Ross proved that when you face prejudice with intelligence, dignity and purpose, you don't just win, you transform the battlefield itself. What about you? Have you ever faced situations where you had to prove your worth against established prejudices? Leave your story and how you reacted in the comments. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that show how true excellence always finds a way to shine, regardless of the obstacles that try to obscure it. The commander destroyed their arrogance without having to lower herself, and built something much greater in the process.